Thanks, Tom, and the rest of the team. I know how much work has gone into this. I was totally thrilled to be invited to be a speaker at the inaugural event. I didn't realize at the time that Tom had me in mind as the warm-up act, the beta version of what you're about to see. I'd like to suggest that I'm sort of the appetizing hors d'oeuvre for a feast of intelligent, insightful views. That's if it goes well. If it goes badly, just think of me as the prawn cocktail before the main course. But there we have it. Reasons to be cheerful. An optimistic future. 7 billion reasons to be cheerful. Well, actually, it's not quite 7 billion. We're about to hit 7 billion, I believe, next year. It's not clear, but November 2012, people think. Actually, it's probably November 29th, if you're interested. In fact, latest calculations are 4:26 and 56 seconds. Now, you'll gather that I'm something of a data nut, that I get very passionate about data, and I'll be talking a lot about data. But I thought I'd start with 3 quotations. The first one was inscribed in the marble of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi in the 6th century BC in gold. The second one's from Aristotle, the founding father of philosophy, of natural history, of the sciences, of political theory. And the third quote's from Woman's Own. I'm going to begin with Knothe Seauton, know thyself, Thales attributed. Not so much in the self-centered, egocentric, inward-looking, who am I, that we think of in a New Age way, but more about where I fit into the cosmos, where I fit into society. And when Aristotle said that man is by nature a political animal, he didn't really mean political in this modern sense, and nothing I will say should be interpreted as political, certainly not party political, but I would hope that some of the observations will inform how democracy may develop and how, as active citizens, we can help shape that democracy and take part in it. And the third one is about there being no such thing as society. Now, when that was said by Margaret Thatcher in an interview in Woman's Own in 1987, she got a lot of stick for that. If we'd have read on, as we should have done, there are individual men and women and there are families. Now, again, controversial, but what I'd suggest is that if she'd gone on and said there are individual men and women and there are relationships, then again, we would have had 3 people pretty much agreed that mankind, that individuals are social beings. What I want to talk about, though, is individuals in an increasingly connected world, admittedly one where social alienation and exclusion is still endemic. I particularly want to talk about the growth of cities and world cities and megacities and how emerging technologies can improve the lives of the citizens. But when you start predicting the future, especially if you've been brought up on comic book ideas about the future, then you can get carried away. The only way of predicting the future really is with hindsight, but we can all shape it today. But I will give you one guarantee. There will be no flying cars in this presentation. What there will be talk about globalization. That has to be the starting point. It's one of the defining characteristics of our era. And as a former journalist who left Fleet Street, such a last millennium sort of description, who left Fleet Street for the internet in the mid-1990s, I want to offer a few observations in the context of globalized technologies. Specifically those digital technologies associated with the internet, the World Wide Web, as we used to call it, and the plethora of mobile or rather portable devices. And in such a context, we often forget the local. We talk about the global, but we forget exactly where we are fixed on this planet of ours. We have global technologies and globalization, global societies, but I still would argue that the geographically specific, the persistent locality that surrounds the mundane in the non-pejorative sense of commonplace, practical, ordinary, the mundane, persistent, and shared locality that surrounds the core of our everyday lives is still important, particularly important. And that's why it's great to be at TEDxBrighton in Brighton, here, sharing our environment together. This is the locality in which most of us make a home, a place to live, where we have a place of work, where there's school places for our children, places to shop, institutions, organizations, businesses who exist to serve us. This is where we are. This is where we are us. I have a passion for postcodes. Those are 6 words that don't often share the same sentence. I counted up the postcodes that have been important in my life. There are about 17 or 18 of them. We'll come back to that, because what I'm interested in is the intersection between global and local, the importance of a sense of place in a connected world with global technologies. In the 60s, Marshall McLuhan, the social theorist, coined the phrase global village. That's the phrase that took hold. I actually love all at onceness, but we'll leave that to one side. And what he talked about was the idea that somehow, he was talking about radio, he wasn't talking about the internet. He's one of the prophets of the internet. He talked about that somehow we were all there and we all shared events as they happened. But I will argue that the idea of a village is the wrong metaphor, and in fact it's misleading. And certainly if you're thinking of it as a sort of community that's embodied in a traditional, even cliched concept of a village, albeit an out-of-date one, an idealized embodiment, a sort of lark rise to cardboard cutout Candleford. Another academic in the 60s was Stanley Milgram, who discovered and researched the idea of the small world, about how we're all 6 handshakes away from each other. It was popularized as 6 handshakes away from the president at one stage, and then it transformed into 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. And again, I think the idea of small world and village are the wrong metaphors. Human beings are social beings, and I believe their humanity, our humanity, is realized in social relationships. The world hasn't got smaller then. What's happened is that networks have got bigger. And that now I would argue that we're living in a period of the global network of network cities. There's some amazing facts about cities, which we'll move on to. But 160,000 years Homo sapiens has been on this planet. Cities, been here 6,000 years. The internet, let's say 50 years, the web 20 years. There are big arguments about that. We are just at the beginning of a period where cities are developing. Already, more than 640 million people live in the 300 largest cities. By 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in cities. They're only 6,000 years old. A lot of those cities now are becoming open data cities. Started off with 1, 2, 3, 4. It's coming to dozens. What I want to use this presentation for is to suggest that the future of Brighton Hove centers on Brighton and Hove becoming one of those open data cities. So what's an open data city? It's where data is made available in a structured, non-proprietary format. In other words, it's not just made available and difficult to get at. There's a commitment to transparency and accountability. So in other words, individuals and institutions agree to be held accountable and to be totally open. In other words, not pick and choose what data is made available. And that when data is made available, it's done, and the results, the fruits of what is created from it is done in a collaborative manner, that it's an act of co-production, to use the jargon. One of the open data cities uses as its slogan, and I quite like it, I think it repays some thought, is a city that thinks like the web. And there they are. Obviously, San Francisco, New York, California is clearly going to be that. That's why we can't have TEDxB, because it would be TEDx Berkeley. What I want to say today is that there is no reason why Brighton and Hove cannot be up there with the San Franciscos and the New Yorks and the Washingtons. We've got London there as an open data city, sort of, but it's got 32 boroughs. It's not quite the same. We've actually got Lichfield that is doing remarkable stuff, and we've got Manchester and Birmingham. What about Brighton and Hove? Potentially, this could be a new dawn for Brighton and Hove. That is actually the dawn in Brighton and Hove. Now, when the sun rises, it rises for everybody is a little-known Cuban proverb, little-known to me anyway. I believe that. But the Portuguese extension was that there is still a shadow, and that covers just a few. So in other words, as we look towards the future, we mustn't exclude people. There will always be an excluded minority, but we mustn't just pound towards the future and leave people behind. So who are we? There we are. There was interest in TEDxBrighton from all over the UK. Someone in Germany. I don't know if they're here. These are just people who applied for tickets. You're the lucky ones or others who got here. Most of us are in Brighton. Some of us live very close to Salis Benny Theatre. Either before or during the run-up to this event, we already had connections. That is what the mesh of interactions between 100 followers of TEDxBrighton looks like. A complex network of interrelationships that already existed. Now that may just be on Twitter, and we know about Twitter. Twitter is that platform that makes you like people you've never met. Facebook is that platform that makes you hate people you know, but... So here we are. These are the people who are following other people. They're following TEDxBrighton, but they're following other people who are also following TEDxBrighton. It's this interconnectedness that I wish to investigate. We talked about 6 degrees of separation, and it all begins with me, or I, one. If say I've got 8 friends, maybe pushing it, and they've got 8 friends, 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 we get to a pretty big number in 6 degrees. In fact, roughly, almost exactly, the population of Brighton and Hove. So in other words, if we network amongst ourselves, we can all be connected. We could become the most connected city in a connected world. And there are lots of advantages to that, I would suggest. As I was preparing for this, I thought of the first sentence of Brighton Rock. As soon as he'd got to Brighton. In the future, though, supposing he got to Brighton and thought he was in a digital city, what do we mean by that? And when can we achieve it? When I prepared this, 2015 seemed quite a way ago. This was before Christmas. Suddenly we're in 2011. It's probably a bit optimistic. But actually, not that much has changed. It's very difficult to predict the future. But actually, tomorrow is always pretty much like today, and the day after, etc. And then suddenly you wake up 5 years on, and you think, gosh, things have changed. But we still arrive at the railway station. The technology's changed there. We've still got buses. We've got some very smart buses. We've still got taxis and queues. We've got a number plate recognition in the railway car park, which is rather good, I think. But it's not connected. People may remember this. You know my passion for postcodes. Well, the people who own postcodes. And Brighton was one of the first 10 cities to use postal districts in 1932. Postcodes have only been with it. Anyway, you don't want to hear about postcodes. You all recognize this. Any of you who got a Christmas present may have been in that queue yesterday because you went back and back and back to queue. Now, the Royal Mail, so far in advance of its time in the 1930s, now leaves a card and asks you to ring a number. And they say, sorry, this answer machine doesn't take messages, hang up now. But it says, it's okay, email them. So you email them. You don't get a response, and no action follows, so you queue up. I sort of asked myself, and this is not political, this is definitely not an argument for privatization, but it does make you wonder what Amazon would do, what Google would do, what that sort of approach to life and technology could do, and where will they do it? The future's already here. We know the future is going to be Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, and there's always new kids on the block. Groupon. Quora, I'm sure Quora is the next big thing that you'll be reading about eventually in all the papers. Voucher clouds is actually. Read up on this. We know the sort of devices. But the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And we're very fortunate. As a community, we've got great resource, great technological resource. Brighton and Hove is a great place to live. That's why we're here. I've lived here since before the internet, that long ago. Actually, before mobile phones. In the UK, we're very fortunate. We have someone who invented the future with the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee. And in fact, in 1991, he painted a vision of the semantic web. You really don't want me to go on about how the internet and the web is going to move from a web of documents into a mesh of databases. There will be more efficient things we can do. We're already doing these. So a lot of these are just experiments. Here we are. Brighton owes its existence to being at the end of a railway line in 1841, and when 2,000 people a day visited the town then, and it exploded in growth because of the railway line. in the next 6 months, 300,000 people visited Brighton by rail. They paid 3 and 6pence, by the way. Here you can see buses and underground tubes moving in real time in Helsinki. You can see underground trains moving in London. You can even see, because there's a techie who lives on the Isle of Wight, you can see Channel ferries being tweeted. If you're in Chicago, you can see where the nearest taxis are, speak into your iPhone, and hail one. In London, you can tweet a London cab. There's lots of stuff going on around the world, around the UK, but it's happening in different places. It's not joined up. I would argue that if we turn ourselves into an open data city, if we ourselves turn ourselves into that, then somebody somewhere will build the future based on that data. All these visualizations rely on data. I couldn't have shown you this 4 months ago. These are the 1,260 bus and coach stops that are in Brighton and Hove. And that's something like 276 per 100,000 population. 17th in the country, rarest place. This comes out of the data, and then on top of that, you can build the sort of applications that I showed you. The reason we couldn't see that was because we weren't allowed to know. The data existed, but it wasn't published. It is now being published increasingly. Yesterday, Google showed how they have improved their maps and Google Earth visualization with new data on Google Maps. And then there's a visualization. This is a guy in California who showed how in real time you can record, visualize, and aggregate tweets within a city and change the terrain of the city. So how do we build an open data city in Brighton and Hove? Brighton and Hove is fortunate. Bounded by the sea, South Downs to the north, a unitary authority, one of 55 in the country. We're responsible for a lot of what we do ourselves, relatively modest in size, and we all love to be here. Brighton and Hove City Council has a key role to play, and that's where, as active citizens, we have an input. I feel a lot closer to a local authority, to my council, to my local councillors, than I do to national or international government and politics. But there are other institutions doing interesting things in Brighton and Hove. We've got Sussex Police. We've got crime mapping going on around the world. The one that we use in Brighton isn't the best in the world, but it could be. We have Surrey and Sussex Probation Trust, who have a fantastic scheme about community payback. We have people doing their community service in our community. Where are they? What do we want them to do? How do we see what they're doing? Well, how do we see the benefits of it? We've got 2 great universities, and we've got the NHS. We've also got the commercial side. I'm particularly taken by Churchill Square. The online shopping, we know about that as a growth area, but you walk into Churchill Square, it is almost a desert in terms of digital technology. And the Seagulls, well, the Brighton and Hove Albion, clearly they and other businesses are close to the hearts of the community. What would a football club look like in an open data city, in a digital city? I've said enough about transport, I think, and the media. The media have a key role to play as well. All these organizations are either publicly accountable, commercially accountable, or at the center of real communities. I would suggest that if each one of those are committed to helping us build an open data city, there's no project plan, there's no roadmap, there's no detail for this, then untold benefits would accrue. What they would be, I don't know. But I do know that Brighton and Hove has got a fantastically vibrant digital creative media environment, 1,800 members and freelancers, part of Wide Sussex. We have the human resource here in the city to make where we live, where we are citizens, a better place, a more prosperous place, an easier place to move around, a more fulfilling place, where we can realize our own humanity. Here's a piece of plagiarism which I couldn't resist because it's one of my favorite writers and authors. More than any other time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness. I don't actually believe this. I don't believe that at all. But Woody Allen is a good guy. If anyone's at all interested in Brighton and Hove becoming an open data city, then please get in touch. Almost anyhow. any time, all the time, all at onceness. I began saying there were 7 billion reasons to be optimistic about the future, that there were reasons for hope. I suggest that there's 250,000 of us in Brighton and Hove that give us, each one of us gives us reason to be optimistic and to look forward to the future with hope. But actually, I would argue, you only really need one reason to be optimistic about the future. And there's one of those born every second. Thank you.